What is preterism? There you go. That's something every one of you talked about yesterday, I'm sure, at the supper table. The reality is that we hardly know about preterism, isn't it? And yet, there are some members of the church who believe and teach preterism. How many of you in here have ever even heard of it? Got two. Okay? Two people. That little word preterism comes from a Latin word, preter. And that word simply means past. Preterism teaches that end-time events have already passed. End-time events have already happened. What do you mean by that, Vic? Well, the second coming of Jesus, the resurrection of the dead, the judgment, all of those things, a preterist says, have already transpired. If you were to ask a preterist, are we waiting on the second coming of Jesus? Oh no, it's already happened. Are we waiting on the resurrection of the dead? Oh no, it's already happened. You see, they believe that right now we are living in a new heaven and a new earth because we are living under the new covenant. The preterist believes that end-time events, every one of them, happened in AD 70 at the destruction of the city of Jerusalem and the fall of the temple of God therein. Sometimes this theory is referred to as the AD 70 theory. There's another name by which it's known. How do you like this one? Realized eschatology. It just gets worse, doesn't it? You're going to go home today and somebody's going to ask you, what did you learn in church today? Well, we learned some things about realized eschatology. Boy, that'll run anybody away from the church, wouldn't it? Eschatology. Folks, that simply is this, the study of final things. The study of the resurrection, the second coming. The study of the judgment. But notice it's realized eschatology. In other words, final things have already been what? Have already been realized according to them. The doctrine has been and is presently espoused within the church. Years ago, there was a man by the name of Max King, a preacher in the churches of Christ, who espoused this doctrine. He wrote a book entitled The Spirit of Prophecy. You can still buy it today, wherein he advocated for realized eschatology. Some refer to the doctrine in the church especially as Kingism because Brother Max King was the main proponent of it at one time. Brother Wayne Jackson, who is now deceased, wrote a book reviewing the AD 70 theory and the doctrine of Max King. So if you get one, get the other, and at least you'll have something to really study and compare to one another. All I want us to do is look at two passages of Scripture. And we're only going to be looking at one subject, the resurrection. Here's what the realized eschatologists teach about the resurrection. The church was established on Pentecost Day in the city of Jerusalem in AD 33. We believe that, don't we? So there we have harmony. But here's what they say. The church was stifled. The church was oppressed. And the church was repressed until the destruction of the city of Jerusalem in AD 70. When the fall of Jerusalem came, When there was a sword taken to Judaism, when there was the fall of the temple, then the church was totally, completely resurrected to life and was free to accomplish its mission on the earth. There's resurrection in the mind of a realized eschatologist. Note, for the preterist, everything is spiritual. Nothing is literal. The second coming of Jesus was spiritual, not literal. It was the coming of the Roman armies upon the city of Jerusalem. The judgment, not literal. It is the judgment of Judaism by God in order to make it fall and no longer play a prominent role in the history of the church. Resurrection, the resurrection of the church to life after being oppressed during those early years. 2 verses. The first is John 11, 23 and 24. Jesus comes to the home of Martha and Mary. They've lost their brother Lazarus. Lazarus has been dead 4 days, and he's in the tomb, is he not? And there's a discussion that ensues, and Jesus saith unto her, Thy brother shall rise again. I find that interesting, don't you? Jesus didn't say the church is going to rise again. He said, Thy brother is going to rise again. And Martha agreed with him, didn't she? Notice what she says. Martha saith unto him, I know that he shall rise again. In the resurrection, in the last day. Again, guys, we're talking about a person, not the church. Notice too, Martha knew that there's going to be a resurrection, didn't she? I know that he will rise again in the resurrection. And notice she says when? In the last day. Was that a teaching that was prominent in Judaism? Oh yes. It was one of the very things that divided the Pharisees from the Sadducees, wasn't it? The Pharisees believed in resurrection. The Sadducees did not believe in a resurrection. And it was one of the things that kept those groups apart and things they debated on a regular basis. And Jesus knew that. And guess which group Jesus commended to the people? The Pharisees. The ones who believed in resurrection of the individual. If you didn't need another passage to refute Kingism, folks, that's the only one you need. But there's another found in John. Marvel not at this. For the hour is coming in which all that are in the grave shall hear His voice and shall come forth. They that have done good unto the resurrection of life. They that have done evil unto the resurrection of damnation. John 5, 28 and 29. Who are we talking about being raised? They that are in what? The graves. We're talking about dead bodies, aren't we? In that verse, Jesus is not talking about the church. Jesus is talking about dead bodies that have been put in graves, and He says one of these days they're going to be resurrected. And notice He says that they will have one of two destinations. Either they'll be raised to life or they'll be raised to condemnation. If this passage is teaching about the resurrection of the church at the fall of Jerusalem, I've got a question for you. What does Jesus' words mean when He says that some are raised to what? To condemnation. When the church was raised, who was it that went into condemnation? Doesn't even make sense, does it? 2 passages of Scripture easily refute this concept of Max Kingism, the 80-70 theory, preterism, whatever you want to call it. We'll come back and study this a lot more sometime.